Hello, welcome back to Let's Talk Title with Coast Title Services. I'm President of ECTS, Dion Moniz.
And I am Ashley Bowen. I am the Director of Operations, a licensed title agent, and an instructor for Florida Realtors.
All right, so this is part one of our two-part series explaining some, but not all, of the FAR bar writers for the contract.
Yes, and I think that the best way to do it is just to go down the line. Paragraph 19 of the FAR bar contract gives you a list of all of the addenda that's available to you for the FAR bar contract, and all of these writers should be on your Form Simplicity or wherever you find your contract documents. I am a lover of the FAR bar contract and all the writers. I think they did a really good job whenever they put all this stuff together.
Yes, and so we're not going to contrast with the CRISP writers. Just know that if you're under a CRISP contract, the CRISP writers are a little bit different in some regards, but make sure you use a CRISP writer for a CRISP contract and a FAR bar writer for a FAR bar contract. Again, because now the vast majority of agents use FAR bar, we're not going to waste your time by going through CRISP. Just know that there are some different writers out there for CRISP, because when they took the 4 pages out of FAR bar and made it the CRISP contract, when they cut 4 pages out of FAR bar, that ended up being new writers
for the CRISP contract. So you have to really be really good at contracts in order to draft a good, solid CRISP contract, because you got to make sure that you add all the writers.
Yeah.
For FAR bar, it kind of includes everything for the most part that you need.
Yes, exactly. So stick with FAR bar, and we're going to hit the writers now.
So at the bottom of each page of the writer, you'll want it to say CR, which is Comprehensive Writer, and then it'll say Florida Realtors and the Florida Bar at the bottom. And so that way you know that you're working on the right contract.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so we're going to go down the line, but the writer A is the condo writer, and we just did an entire episode on the condo writer, and so go back and look at the condo writer episode if you want to know about the condo writer.
Yes.
But what I can say about the condo writer and the HOA writer is that the seller needs to be filling this out. The buyer should not be filling this out. It is the seller representing to the buyer what all of the dues are, if there's assessments, how much they are, who they get paid to, all of that. So the seller needs to fill it out, and then the buyer needs to acknowledge it. There are a list of items that the buyer is supposed to receive when they go under contract in an HOA or a condo association. And so make sure that the buyer gets all of those things.
Yes.
As the seller, as a listing agent, I would have that writer and all the documents in my documents in my MLS, so that the buyers can just pull them whenever they're making offers.
Yep, have them ready.
So A is condo writer, B is homeowners association. Make sure that you have the sellers fill those out to the best of their knowledge.
And we also had a separate episode on the next writer, which is C, seller financing. So we dedicated a whole podcast episode to that. Just know that writer is there, and if you're going to be doing seller financing, go in there and fill out those blanks for the loan terms, because that's what I use to draft the seller finance documents for the transaction. It's pretty self-explanatory writer.
So you would, if you're going to use the seller financing writer C, then in the financing section of the contract, paragraph 8, you're going to want to mark paragraph 8 D, which is the purchase money, note, and mortgage to the seller, and then you attach the seller financing writer. On page 2 of the seller financing writer, it has all the terms, like how much the loan amount's going to be, for how many months, at what interest rate, if it's going to balloon or not, all that. And that is all the information that Dion really needs to draft the loan documents.
Yeah. Yep. Does a good job of getting all the loan terms.
The next one is going to be the assumption of an existing mortgage. This writer, I think, could use some tweaking. I just said I loved them all. So if the buyer is going to be assuming the seller's existing mortgage, it happens a lot with veterans. VA mortgages are assumable. Not many other mortgages are assumable.
You've been seeing a few of those lately.
Over the last few years, quite a few, because back in 2021, 2022, those interest rates were incredible, and so yes, I see people assuming 2.5% interest rate loans quite a bit, and it's awesome. The thing I don't love about this writer is, so the writer says that we're going to, it's encumbered by an existing mortgage and with this amount of principal that's still due on it, and then they fill out the interest rate and stuff like that, and then the buyer is trying to assume this mortgage. The thing I think this needs to have on it is to talk about the closing date, because it doesn't talk anything about the closing date, and it should. Whenever you're doing an assumption, it will take historically around 120 days. And we have no idea when it's going to close until the lender's like, oop, we're ready, let's close tomorrow. And oh my God. So I think this rider should be tweaked for it to say the closing of this contract shall occur within 10 days of the lender approving the loan assumption, but it doesn't.
It's something to keep in mind on the seller side. So if there is going to be an assumption, and if the seller is under a certain deadline to get it closed, then under additional terms, there needs to be some language saying if the loan assumption is not complete by X date,
the seller gets out.
Yeah, the seller can get out. Because to your point, if it takes an extra 120 days, the seller can't wait that long for whatever reason, then the seller needs an out. Otherwise, you're stuck.
And you and I have also had to use another one of these riders, which was the pre-closing occupancy rider,
Yes.
for an assumption, so that the buyer needed to move in. I think everybody was PCSing. It was the season. Buyers needed a place to live. Seller needed somebody to pay their mortgage, and so it worked out. You did a pre-closing occupancy, and the buyer was able to pay the seller rent, which was going towards their mortgage. So somebody was paying the mortgage. Buyer had a place to go. It all worked out. But we use these riders to make it happen.
Yep, absolutely. All right.
Rider E is the rider that you will use if you have an FHA or a VA loan. Don't forget to use this. It has the language in there where the veteran cannot lose their earnest money if the property doesn't appraise, and it's going to be a requirement for any FHA or VA loan. It used to say that the seller was going to pay for all these fees, doc prep, underwriting, tax service, and termite, and that was getting very hefty on the seller side. Right. And then luckily when they revised this in 2021, they removed that language, and so now the seller's not stuck with all these fees on the buyer side.
Yeah, that was a good revision.
Rider F is the appraisal contingency. So it makes the property contingent upon the property appraising for a certain dollar amount. Right.
Yeah, because the regular contract just says it has to appraise due to or to lender satisfaction, whereas the appraisal contingency rider, you can specify a dollar amount. It doesn't have to necessarily be the purchase price. It can be whatever you put in there if the parties agree, obviously.
And the contract also says an appraisal or alternative valuation of the property that's satisfactory to the lender. So it's not even saying it has to be an appraisal. It could be anything that the lender likes. So if, as the buyer, you want it to appraise for a certain dollar amount, this appraisal contingency is a great thing to add.
Yep, absolutely.
And it gives you a date as when the appraisal must be due by. And the contract just says that it has to be due within the loan approval period. So you could even make the appraisal be due before the loan approval period if you want, or after.
Yeah, because in the old contract, the appraisal was outside of the loan approval period and was another out that the buyer could have. Now it's built into the loan approval. So if the buyer needs additional time for the appraisal, then that's why you would use that rider.
And it would make it to where it's doesn't have to be a part of the loan approval period because the rider controls.
That's right.
Oh, Good one. Okay, rider G is the short sale approval contingency. And sadly, I've been seeing lots of short sales lately, and buyers having to bring money to the table, bringing money to the table to close. Residential properties that were purchased within the last couple of years where they just haven't made
a lot of cash flowing. Yeah.
And so that's sad. I think our office is currently working on 3 short sales right now. But if that is the situation and the seller is needing to do a short sale, then this is the rider to add, rider G.
And keep in mind, short sales take a long time, so be prepared for it to last months, which is addressed. We've had. Let's hope it doesn't get back to that. But
hopefully, the seller has already started the process before they ever go under contract. And if you can get approved to do a short sale and then find a buyer, that is the best way to do it. And then it doesn't have to be so long. One of mine, I think it'll be a 45-day close that we've got right now with a short sale. So it doesn't have to be long.
So if you're on buyer side and you don't want to wait necessarily 6-12 months for this approval of the short sale process, because it really is, you're at the mercy of the lender's calendar on this. So if there is a certain time frame you want to put in there, so if it's not approved by a certain date, you can back out and get your EMD, then that can be specified. So just keep that in mind. All right?
Yes, so you can give a deadline in this thing, and then you can also say if the seller is able to or not able to take backup offers on this rider. So it's a good rider, and I haven't seen that one used very much, so don't forget that it's there. It's a good one.
Yep.
The homeowner's insurance and flood insurance rider is
Rider
the next
H.
one, Rider H. So this one is actually really good for the day, the time that we are right now with the insurance market. I mean, it is crazy. Policies are expensive. Thank goodness our governor is trying to get rid of our property taxes. But it can be super high. So the buyer can put a cap as to how much the policy for flood or homeowners insurance will be using this rider. So if they cannot pay more than $10,000 a year for insurance, and they can make sure that they won't have to with this.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, especially on waterfront properties. Well, in general, insurance is just really high. So as a buyer, if you're kind of tight on making the numbers work and you're worried about insurance taking you over that limit, then this rider is helpful for that.
I'm shocked at how high insurance is lately.
I know. It's crazy.
Okay, so rider I is the mold inspection. And I kind of love this part of the contract and the disclosures where it talks about mold. It said, mold is naturally occurring and may cause health risks or damage to property. If buyer is concerned or desires additional information regarding mold, buyer should contact an appropriate professional. So if buyer is concerned about mold and they want a mold inspection, they should use the mold inspection rider.
I mean, we do live in Florida, so mold's everywhere.
I love that the contract's like, it's just natural, so get over it. But if you're concerned, you can get it taken care of.
Yeah.
And so at the buyer's expense, the buyer may have a mold inspection within however many days of the effective date of the contract, and then there's a limit to where if the mold is going to cost this much, more than this much to remediate, then buyer can cancel the contract.
Yes, it gives the buyer an additional out. So if you're afraid there's going to be mold in the property, and in fact there is, and the cost to remediate is more than the stated amount in the rider, you can get out and get your EMD back. So,
but it's all on the buyer. The buyer can pay for the inspection. The buyer will pay for the mold repairs. The seller's not obligated to do any of that, just because they use the mold inspection rider.
Right.
Rider J is going to be the interest-bearing account. So it just means that if the buyer wants the escrow agent to hold their money in an interest-bearing account where the buyer earns the interest, then we can do that. We have to open up a total separate escrow account that is interest-bearing, and the escrow agent is authorized to deduct service charge from the interest, so it doesn't all get to go to the buyer.
Yeah, if we have to go through the trouble of opening a separate account, we're going to charge escrow fees. So the only time this really helps the buyer is if there's a lot of EMD being held for a long period of time. Otherwise, our escrow fees are going to eat up the interest anyway. So just keep that in mind.
Don't use Rider J. Just kidding. Okay, now Rider L is...
Well, we have K first.
Oh, K.
Know your ABCs.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Okay. K, as is.
As is. So... And we actually just did an episode on the difference or the differences in the as-is contract versus regular. So what this rider does is put all the protections of the as-is into the regular contract. So it removes the repair limits and puts in the inspection period and right to cancel. And again, we just spent a whole episode talking about this, but now the buyer can convert the contract to an as-is contract. Seller will not have repair obligations, but the buyer will have the right to cancel for whatever reason within the inspection period. And of course it restates the property maintenance section.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I don't see that one used very often. Okay, and now L is the right to inspect and right to cancel.
So that basically just adds the second part of the as-is. So it doesn't make it a true as-is contract, but it adds in the right to inspect, right to cancel section. So you still have the repair limit buckets in the regular contract. It's just now buyer has the absolute right to cancel, if the house has Chinese drywall or whatever, even if the seller's willing to repair it,
and it even
the buyer
says
can back out.
The buyer determines in buyer's sole discretion that the property is not acceptable to buyers, so therefore they don't necessarily need a licensed professional. They can just make that determination on their own.
That's right. So you get to keep the protections of the regular contract with the reps and warranties and the repair limits, but the buyer gets that absolute right to cancel within the inspection period.
If I was a buyer, I would want this.
Yeah. Sellers, back in the days when it was a seller's market, sellers would reject any offer that had this on it because they didn't want buyer to have an absolute out. But it's more of a buyer's market now, so we're starting to see these come back into the contracts.
All right.
So we're going to rider M, as in Mary.
Okay.
That's the defective drywall.
Defective drywall. So the seller just says that they have no actual knowledge of drywall being defective, and then the buyer can conduct a risk assessment inspection for the presence of defective drywall if they want to. And here's where they do it. They say they're going to or they're not going to have that inspection done.
There was a time frame where that was a popular rider, but the whole Chinese drywall situation, that's all kind of behind us now, so it's not that big a deal anymore.
I've never seen this rider used
in
real life. This one I have, though, in the coastal construction control line. If the property is partially or totally seaward of the CCCL, then you would use this, and the buyer is either going to request having a CCCL affidavit or survey done or waiving the right to have one done. But if your property is seaward of that coastal control line, then you need to include this rider in.
Yep. All right, moving on to O, installation disclosure. Anything worthy of talking about there?
Very interesting here. I've not seen this one done. I think that most builders have their own contracts usually, and so this type of information would be in there. This is only for new construction, and then you just tell them the type of insulation that was provided. This would be something that the seller would definitely have to fill out for the buyer, because obviously the buyer wouldn't know it.
Right, exactly.
And then P is the lead-based paint disclosure form. So anything that was built prior to 1978 must have this form attached to it. It was just a thing back in 1978. Lead-based paint poisoning.
Yep, lead paint was a popular thing back then.
Housing for older people. So I guess this is probably something that you have to sign in the villages.
Yeah, I wonder what the age limit on that. I might be getting close to having to use that rider next time I buy a house.
So if the homeowners association, we do have a trailer park. Camp at the Gulf, I think, is one of them.
Yes.
That's a 65 and older community.
Yes.
So if you are writing a contract for a property that's in one of those communities, I don't know if Margaritaville is considered a 65 and older.
No, I think they're 55 and older.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there we go, 55 and older.
Yeah.
You'd need to use this for Margaritaville.
Well, and they have their own contracts.
Of course. They're probably got palm trees on them and stuff, too.
Yeah, exactly.
Smell like sunscreen.
All right, we got time for one or two more, and then we'll break for part two.
Okay. If the buyer is wanting to rezone, I don't see this used a lot, but it should get used more because I'll see contracts quite a bit where there's language drafted in additional terms about buyer wanting to split the lot or what have you, but the Florida Bar has provided us with a contract for that.
Yeah, and you're talking about rider R. Mm-hmm. So yeah, good to have that if you need it. Now the next one in rider S, the lease purchase lease option. That's actually a pretty good one because I've done some lease with purchase options as part of these contracts.
So they just would add this to a residential contract, and
then you have to have the actual agreement that I would have
is
to
separate.
draft.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And we'll stop here, but those next two riders also need an agreement.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's what I'm here for. Yeah. So these riders that say, the site agreement to be provided or included, that's where I come in and can draft those. But yeah, we'll save the pre and post occupancy agreement riders for next time, as well as the other riders. So we wanted to break this up a little bit so that you don't have to listen to us for a full hour at once. But hopefully you got a little bit out of the first part of our explanation of the FAR bar riders, and we'll see you shortly for part 2. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.